Hello, and welcome to the Future of Freight Festival here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Today, we are having a cute little fireside chat. We are breaking down all things freight fraud with the one and only Danielle Spinelli, an account executive at Descartes. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited about today. This is, I think, something that's very relevant, very timely. Everybody wants to know what's happening in the freight space. Before we get too far into that, let's get some background on you and how you got started at MyCarrierPortal/Descartes.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm Danielle Spinelli. I've been in the industry, I think I'm almost at 9 years, 10 years, something like that. I was a broker before I worked here as like a carrier sales rep for about 8 years, and then kind of got into the tech space because I was a user of MyCarrierPortal. Loved it, kept talking to people here, and now I'm ended up here. And then we just got acquired by Descartes, I think it was mid-September if I'm remembering right. So kind of part of that whole big company. It's going from MyCarrierPortal to a big company has been really fun and kind of a roller coaster. It's been great.
I mean, we love a whirlwind from a nice intimate operation up to just a casual mom and pop operation.
Right, yeah.
But more importantly, so one of the things you guys have really been focusing on at MyCarrierPortal and Descartes is fraud, which is something that everybody's focusing on.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you know, it's kind of popped off in the last
Big
year.
deal, yeah.
It's kind of a big deal. So what are some of the more, like, we're all familiar with double brokering,
Right.
Identity theft, et cetera. What are some of the more kind of unique fraud situations that you've seen happen in the recent history?
I think what's kind of the newest and greatest of fraud is the phishing attempts are insane. I mean, these carriers are getting bombarded, and brokers are getting bombarded with phishing attempts. So it's really like, let's look into what email every email you have, just because it sends a link, don't be pressing it. So that's been interesting. And then honestly, one of the newer things that we've been hearing about they're just have gotten so creative, I guess, is insurance agencies, and they create a whole website. The insurance place looks legit. It's insane. And then they're creating fake certificates. So if you don't have a company that's monitoring that for you and like validating, is this actually an insurance agent? You don't know who you're getting, and that's kind of the newest, craziest thing.
I mean, like, one of the things that we've always said is, if you're a broker or 3PL especially, verify your insurance for that carrier, call their company, et cetera, et cetera. But that's something that I've not heard yet. That's unique.
It's very unique. And yeah, the numbers are real, websites look real. I mean, it's quite a thing. So, and luckily, I guess from day one, we've had that in place where an insurance agent, before we request that, has to be validated. And so if you don't have a service that's doing that for you, I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing out there right now. And if you don't have a real insurance and your stuff's getting stolen, I mean, you got an issue.
Yeah, and a lot of insurance companies are even like, because theft and fraud and everything's on the rise, they're tweaking insurance plans to cover different things and maybe not cover certain things. So it's definitely one of those that you're like, oh, we actually probably should be investigating that this is real instead of just like Joe's House of Insurance.
Right, and like even doing like your due diligence, like you need to present your case to an insurance company because in the end they're going to try to not pay. So hey, I've done all of this research, I have all of this information, and just because this guy was a crook doesn't mean I need to pay everything out of pocket. Like, come on. So anyways, yes, having services where you're showing your due diligence is so key, I feel like.
I also that insurance one is just blowing my mind because I've heard like it's like people aren't kidding when they're saying that fraud is getting so much more sophisticated. It's not just like, oh, there's this truck, I'm gonna smash and grab and see what I can get.
Right.
People are really like making whole enterprises out of it, which just, I mean, look, make it legal. Make a legal enterprise.
I'm like, you can make money actually in this industry, but yeah, do it right. Yeah.
But like we've even seen stuff with like MC number manipulation where they'll just go buy someone's entire company and be like, okay, well, like you can't tell the difference unless you happen to see that their address has changed or there's been any changes with the FMCSA, and it's kind of like, I feel like fraud now is just how many ghosts can I chase?
Right, and one thing that we just implemented is our two-factor authentication. So it's more of, let's say you do sell your MC and somebody's like, hey, I'll pay you whatever amount extra to not tell anybody for a little while, which why are you taking that money? You're in on it too. Anyways, it's a different story. But that part as well, like if they're logging in, let's say trying to fill out whatever, I have to do that two-factor to like on their cell phone, and kind of stops them from getting further on that route. And then another thing that we have that came out, which kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but is our location, like knowing who you're talking to, where are they? So not only on the the driver level, we do a VIN verification. Who is this truck? Who exactly is pulling up at that shipper? Where are they? And then on top of that, who's this dispatcher? Who am I talking to? Where are they? Are they really in the U.S.? Or if they're not, you need to tell me. Let's be honest about it. Yeah.
So along those lines, you said that you guys have some things that you've implemented to help ultimately catch the bad actors.
Right.
What are some other things that you've seen either through your guys' software platforms or your guys' portfolio, or just in the industry that you've seen be mostly successful at least stopping a lot of the attacks? Because I don't know that there's a way to stop all of them, but
Right.
definitely a way to stop a majority of them. Have you guys seen any strategies be like the most successful?
To me, that VIN verification is huge. Like if I'm talking to, a driver and they say, oh, I'm empty in Chicago, and then they send in a picture of their truck that doesn't belong to them, and you're like, wait a second. Oh, I'm an owner-operator. Cool. I need a lease agreement. Like I still need contracts in place. And then he's tracking in Atlanta. It's like, okay, we have an issue here. That's kind of knowing who you're dealing with before you're putting them on a load, before you're tracking them. And then what's coming soon, which is super exciting, because we're part of Descartes, is with macro points information, having all that data come into my carrier portal, and then you can see, hey, this carrier has been tracked on X amount of loads, and they're tracking percentages or this, or on time, kind of really knowing who you're dealing with, not only on the initial, like how have you been operating on an FMCSA safety level, but like how are you actually tracking, and how are you actually handling my load?
So you're saying that you have potentially like an all network wide, not just for like my brokerage A or my shipper A.
Right.
You're saying across every carrier, shipper, broker situation they're registered with, we have like historical information on where they've been tracking and other stuff like that. Like, so that's a thing?
Yeah, MacroPoint, MacroPoint's been in space for a long time and really kind of the kingpin of everything. I remember being a broker and that was what we used day in, day out. So their data from however many years they've been active and however many, millions of loads that they've tracked, and all of that data coming in, and because they've had it, but it's like, where do they put it? So it's part of the why they chose my carrier portal, to kind of show off that 360 view of a carrier.
That's actually really impressive, because I can't honestly think of many shippers or anyone that wouldn't have some sort of tracking.
Right.
That was my first introduction to MacroPoint. Was I sat above a brokerage floor, and all I heard all day was, oh, do you have MacroPoint? Do you have MacroPoint? And
Yeah.
I was like, what is this MacroPoint? And they're
Yeah.
like, it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and what's interesting is even on the fraud level on MacroPoint, they've been having like spoof numbers, so then they can manipulate where their location is. So MacroPoint has done updates where the spoofing is detected, or let's say kind of another white collar crime we'll say is they're taking over the road loads and putting them on rail, and hey, I didn't pay you for a rail rate. Let's talk about
That's been going on for
It's been going on forever.
forever.
And so now with that tracking, I actually have that information because we're pulling directly from ELDs. It's not just someone's phone. We do that as well, but ELDs really are the most reliable part. So, our integration with all these different companies with the ELDs is making such a difference as far as knowing how the whole trailer, everything's tracking.
So out of curiosity, since you guys are like kind of this all-encompassing platform, you have everybody on board, is it difficult to get carriers on board with it? Or since they're kind of already using MacroPoint or other things or other tracking tools, it's just the cost of doing business?
I think a lot of it had to do with carrier trust, and both MCP and MacroPoint have been in the industry over 10 years, and I think kind of been a household name to carriers. And part of, I know, MCP's process and everything we update is how is this going to affect the carrier? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are in there filling out contracts for our customers, but you want it to be as easy as possible. We understand these guys are on the road. Like, sometimes you'll see where they're, on their phone agreeing to a contract, and you're like, oh, well, you're not supposed to be texting and driving, sir, but we get it.
I'm going to assume that you filled this out while you
Yeah.
were filling up on gas.
Yes.
But like you said, like they don't necessarily have like a full computer or a full office
Right.
situation. Like they can't send you a fax from the road.
Right, exactly. They can't print off a PDF packet and all these things. So really focusing on making this as easy of an experience for the carrier, and then also checking all the boxes for the broker. So I think both MacroPoint and MCP, that's really been our focus is carrier-wise. And whenever we launch something new, we have a group of carriers. We're like, hey, what do you think about this process? Do you think this is going to make things more difficult for you? I mean, we're talking to carriers, brokers, really making sure that all around the process is as easy of a flow as,
You kind of have like a focus group of like, hey, is this actually going to be easier for you or not? Because I think that's another thing that people really kind of like say. They're like, oh, like we're here to support carriers. We're here to make everything better. We're here to do all this. But then inevitably, whatever solution they have ends up making it harder or more difficult for carriers to get the job done, to move freight, to get registered with somebody.
Right.
So I'm just like, are we actually, like, who's actually asking carriers if this is more helpful? And I think I think as this fraud conversation grows and continues, and as, we kind of figure out new ways that this is happening, I think kind of getting carriers involved earlier on, I think is almost going to be another way that you can like overall combat all the different aspects of fraud. Obviously, maybe don't get the fraudulent carriers involved.
Right. We won't be talking to those guys. But no, what's interesting too is even on the carrier level, I mean, they're getting as much fraud as brokers are. Mm-hmm. So having, like I was at the Broker Carrier Summit, however many weeks ago that was, and talking to carriers right then, like, hey, if you're getting asked these questions by a broker, like I know it's upsetting and I know you gotta do these extra vetting steps and I know you're just here to drive. However, also that's kind of like a process for you to think in your head, like, hey, these guys are vetting me, so that means they're probably more legit than, a non-legit broker asking me all these. But they're not asking questions, they're just trying to get you on the load to make money.
There's like that fine line between asking a bunch of questions and being a little too overboard, and then also just being like, you say you have a truck? Okay, can you be here tomorrow for $500? If you're getting that, maybe, just maybe, do a little bit more digging.
But it shouldn't be an invasion of privacy either.
Right.
I mean, and I think drivers, that's what they're probably the biggest scariest part out there is, I don't want to be tinfoil hat guy, but I don't want all my stuff out there. So part of the tracking data as well, I know you mentioned that with MacroPoint, that was a big thing in the beginning. All these drivers are like, I don't want you looking at everywhere I'm going. And I think really they understand that it's just from A to B. It's not an unlimited access to where you're going. It's just specifically for that load.
Well, because I think especially at the beginning when all the different track and trace software came out, everyone was like, well, I don't want you to see how long I'm stuck at a truck stop, or like if I have to go 20 miles out a route to use a restroom, like I don't want you to know that. And it's like, my guy, we really don't care. We just want to know if you're going to get from point A to point B, or if you did take 100 miles out a route, well, was it because a road was closed? Do I need to let other people know?
Yeah.
Do I need to start adding this onto these types of loads? Like, what kind of thing are we working with here? And I think now that it's been around a minute, everybody's like, okay, it's not actually them watching me 24/7.
Right.
Going, he's stuck at this exit. Why is he stuck at this exit? What's going on? Like, it's not that deep, my guy. Not that deep.
Well, not only that, but I mean, as a driver, I mean, you're literally just wanting to be from A to B and not your phone being blown up, having to answer, hey, where are you at right now? That part of it, I think they realize that it makes just their whole drive easier.
You mean you don't have to enact my patented thing of the crazy ex-girlfriend method, where if you absolutely have to get a hold of a driver, it always works within 15 minutes. Call, they don't answer, hang up. Call, hang up. Call, hang up. And just if you bombard their phone, eventually they will answer.
That's so
We'll
funny.
have a very angry driver, which is why it is desperate times. But yeah, it is a method that I'm glad doesn't have to be quite as prevalent.
And now with the fraud too, I mean, they need to understand that everyone's trying to protect themselves, and even on the carrier level. So having all that tracking data, all that information that you can see up front on a carrier. And then also what's coming is with that VIN verification, you'll be able to see more on like a driver level. Like, hey, this is the driver that I'm putting on this load. This is his phone number. I'm sending him this text. I'm verifying how he's been tracking. Because you may have a great carrier. They may be the best, have the best tracking percentages, whatever. But you got like one new bad driver that you're like, I should.
There's always one.
There's always one. So
So,
knowing that ahead of time, I think makes a big difference.
so we have about less than a minute left. So if anyone has any questions on fraud or prevention or anything we've talked about today, where can they find you outside of this chat?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Danielle Spinelli, and then my email is dspinelli@descartes.com. Hit me up, because I do want to hear all the fraud stories and what have you been hit with, what are you learning, what's your processes. You know, I feel like the broker community or the logistics community really should be talking more about what are you doing day in and day out to help each other, combat this.
Yeah, I think the more we can share resources and say, this is what's working, this is what's not, I think is overall going to help everybody.
Right, and not only that, whatever you're doing, maybe you're doing some manual process that I can add into my software that makes it, automated.
Yeah.
Let's talk. So hit me up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us
Yes,
today, and
thank
stay
you.
tuned for the rest of the festival, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.